The smell of rain and roses. The rain came the way it always did along the Costa Vieja, without warning, without apology, just a sudden silver curtain drawn across the bay. Luca Vega stood on the porch of the house he had built with his own savings and his own stubborn hands, watching the water darken the terracotta tiles of their garden path. He was holding 2 cups of chamomile tea, both still steaming. Marisol appeared behind him, her bare feet silent on the warm wood. She was wearing the white linen shirt she always stole from his side of the wardrobe, its hem grazing the tops of her thighs. Her dark hair was loose, still faintly smelling of the rosemary oil she massaged into her scalp every Friday night. Luca turned and felt, as he always did when he looked at her, that small private miracle, the fact that this woman had chosen him, chosen this life, chosen the sound of rain over some other louder world. "You made tea," she said softly, taking the cup. "You were cold," he replied. "I could tell from the way you were sleeping." She laughed, low and quiet, the kind of laugh that lived only in private places, in bedrooms and kitchens and the passenger seat of their old truck. She leaned her head against his shoulder and they stood watching the rain fill the garden, the roses they had planted on their 3rd anniversary bowing under the weight of the water. Luca pressed his lips to her hair. "Do you ever think," she asked, not moving, "that things are too good?" "No," he said. "I think things are exactly right." She was quiet a long moment, fingers wrapped around the warm ceramic. Somewhere in the house the old hallway clock ticked the minutes away. "Luca." "Nothing," she whispered. "I just wanted to say your name." He smiled and held her tighter. The rain grew heavier. The roses bent lower. Neither moved, suspended in that tenderness only long-settled love creates, when 2 people know each other's breath, each other's silences, each other's particular weight in the dark. Later that night, after supper, after the dishes were washed and the lights turned low, Marisol sat at the edge of their bed. Luca lay on his side watching her, the amber lamplight carving the curve of her shoulder, the line of her throat. In that light she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He sat up and reached for her, his hand sliding slowly down her back, and she shivered and turned to face him. He kissed her slowly, the way a man kisses a woman he has kissed 1,000 times and still feels the electricity of the very first. Deliberately, attentively, like someone reading something they already love and finding new sentences each time. Her hands moved to his jaw, tilting his face, and she pulled back just far enough to look at him. "You're always so careful with me," she whispered. "I know what I have," he murmured. She pulled him close again and they fell together into the warm dark of their bed, the rain steady against the windows, the roses somewhere beyond the glass bowing and bowing in the storm. He fell asleep with his hand in her hair. She lay awake for a very long time. The letter in the drawer. It was a Tuesday when everything changed, which Luca would later think was somehow fitting. Betrayal rarely arrives on a dramatic Friday night. It prefers ordinary Tuesdays, the unremarkable days when your guard is down and the light is flat and you are doing something mundane, like looking for a key. Luca had been searching for the spare key to the garden shed. Marisol was out, visiting Elena. He had gone to her jewelry box on the dresser because Marisol was the kind of person who dropped small things into small containers without logic, and he thought perhaps the key had found its way there. It wasn't the key he found. The envelope was folded twice, tucked beneath her grandmother's coral bracelet. No name on the outside. No stamp. Hand-delivered. Then. His fingers hesitated less than a second before some cold and knowing part of him opened it. The handwriting was Damien's. He would have known it anywhere, his younger brother's loose, slanted script, the same handwriting from birthday cards and notes slid under doors during childhood arguments. He read it. Then he read it again. Then he set it down on the dresser and walked to the window. Outside, an old man walked a small dog. A child rode a bicycle. The world continued with absolute indifference. The letter was not crude or explicit. In some ways, that made it worse. Damien had written to Marisol with a tenderness that suggested something that had lasted, something that had been cared for and returned to. There were references Luca couldn't place, a September weekend, a night he had been away in Bilbao. Small coordinates of a hidden life. Luca sat on the edge of the bed. He was still sitting there when Marisol's key turned in the front door. He heard her call his name from the hallway, bright and casual and fond, the the same voice she had used every evening for 8 years. Her steps on the stairs. The pause outside the bedroom door. She entered and stopped. The letter was still on the dresser. She saw it immediately. Her face changed in a way he had never witnessed, a terrible collapsing, as though something structural had given way behind her eyes.
Luca.
Sit down, he said. His voice was someone else's. Very calm. Very far away. She Saturday. Outside, the small dog barked once and was quiet. Confessions taste like blood. She told him everything. She told him the way people speak when they have carried something too long, not in a rush, not in a flood, but in a slow and devastating unraveling, each sentence taking its full shape in the air between them before the next one was formed. She told him quietly. She did not look away from his face. It had begun 3 years ago. Not with intention, she said. There was a night when Damien had come by while Luca was traveling, and they had drunk wine on the porch and talked in the way Marisol said she sometimes found difficult with Luca, who was steady and good but who was not, she admitted with her voice barely above a whisper, always easy to reach in the deep places where she felt most alone. I'm not saying that to hurt you. It hurts, Luca said quietly. The wine, the night, the grief they shared over the baby they had lost in their 2nd year of marriage, the loss they had never properly mourned together. And Damien had always looked at her in a certain way, a way she had always felt and always refused, and that night in her loneliness she had stopped refusing. Luca listened without moving. Hands on his knees. The lamp burning its amber light. How many times, he said. She told him. He closed his eyes. When she reached across and covered his hand with both of hers, he did not pull away. He sat with her fingers over his and his eyes closed, doing something private and immense inside himself. I stopped, she said. 8 months ago. I told Damien it was finished. I don't know if that changes anything. Why didn't you tell me then? His voice broke once, cleanly. Why did you keep lying down beside me every night, Marisol, knowing? She was crying now, not dramatically, not as performance, just a quiet private weeping she made no effort to conceal. Because I was a coward, she said. And because I love you. I know both things cannot be true at the same time. But they are. Luca stood and walked to the window. She watched him from the bed, his shoulders, his breathing, the way his hands gripped the sill like it was the only solid thing in the room. When he turned around, his face was completely still. I need you to call Elena, he said carefully. And I need you to go stay with her tonight.
Luca.
I'm not throwing you out. I'm asking. Because if you stay here tonight, I don't know what version of me you'll be in the room with. She went. He sat in the dark kitchen until 4 in the morning, not moving, not weeping, cataloguing every memory now stained by a new and terrible light, holding each one up like glass to a flame, watching what it changed. The house still smells like her. The weeks that followed were the quietest of Luca's life. Damien did not call. Damien had apparently left the city. Tomas told Luca this over the phone in a voice thick with shame and an old man's helplessness. Sonia called 3 times. Luca let the phone ring all 3 times. He did not yet have the capacity to absorb their grief alongside his own. He moved through the days with careful, deliberate smallness. He made coffee. He walked the waterfront. He fixed the loose shutter on the upstairs window, repainted the garden gate, pulled the overgrown salvia from the flower bed. He stood a long time looking at the roses before deciding to leave them. They were not her roses. They were also not hers. Tomas came in person eventually, on a Saturday, with a bottle of brandy he set on the kitchen table without ceremony and sat down across from his son. He was a broad, tired-looking man with grey at his temples and Luca's same dark eyes, and he looked at his firstborn with an expression of pure, unornamented sorrow. I don't know what to say to you, Tomas admitted. Then don't say anything, Luca said. It wasn't unkind. They drank brandy while the afternoon light moved across the kitchen floor. Tomas talked about small things, the fishing, the market, a pipe at the family house. Luca listened and was grateful for the smallness of it. Your brother, Tomas began once. Not yet, Luca said quietly. Tomas nodded and didn't try again. After his father left, Luca sat in the garden as night came in. The roses were still blooming, indifferent, relentless, faintly ridiculous in their beauty. He thought about the man he had been 2 months ago, standing on this same porch holding 2 cups of chamomile tea, believing completely in the life around him. He did not hate Marisol. He had waited for the hatred and it hadn't come. What came instead was grief, and something quieter than grief, a reckoning. A man taking full honest stock of what he had and had not been. He had been steady in all the visible ways, the house, the tea, the roses, and absent in the invisible ones. He had loved her loudly in gestures and quietly in words, and the quiet had grown into a space that someone else had walked into. This did not excuse her, but it explained something. He filed the papers the following week. Not with anger. With a clean and sorrowful precision, as though he were finally setting down something that had become too heavy to carry any further. Marisol signed without contest. She sent one final message, 6 words only: "I hope you find something real." Luca read it 3 times, then put his phone down and looked at the sea. Petals don't beg to grow back. For months later, Luca Vega was standing at the edge of the water with his shoes off and his trousers rolled to the knee, watching the tide come in. He had rented a small room at a guest house on the northern coast, a different coast, rockier and more elemental than the one he had shared with Marisol, the kind of place where the wind was personal and the light was hard and clean. He had come to write, because he had always wanted to write and had always placed it behind more urgent, visible things. He had been here 3 weeks. He had filled 2 small notebooks. He heard her before he saw her, a laugh, bright and unguarded, coming from further up the beach where a woman was trying to keep hold of a paper map in the wind. She was failing spectacularly. The map had become a living thing, thrashing and diving, and she was chasing it with the pure physical comedy of someone who had decided to find the situation funny rather than frustrating. Luca caught the corner of the map as it blew past him. She stopped. They looked at each other. She was taller than he expected, with light eyes and the wind-burnt complexion of someone who spent time outdoors without apology. Her hair was pulled back loosely and several strands had escaped to perform their own chaotic dance around her face. She was not trying to look any particular way. Luca found this, without entirely understanding why, the most attractive thing he had seen in years. "Thank you," she said, slightly breathless. "It put up a fight," he offered. She laughed, the same laugh from further up the beach, easy and real. Her name was Isla Marin, marine biologist. She studied the rock pool ecosystems along this stretch of coast and carried a rucksack full of sample jars and a thermos of black coffee she offered to share without fanfare. They sat together on a large flat rock while the tide came in around them and the light turned golden. She asked what he was doing there. He said writing. She asked about what. He thought a moment and said, honestly, about the difference between the life you think you have and the life you actually have. She considered this and nodded as though it were a perfectly reasonable thing to be writing about. She did not ask why. He did not explain. They sat until the tide reached their rock and they had to move up the beach, laughing now, both of them, at the small absurdity of being displaced by the sea. They ended up at the little cafe at the top of the path, sharing a bowl of salted almonds, talking about her research in his notebooks and the particular quality of the light on the northern coast. When she stood to leave she smiled and said she would be back at the same stretch of beach tomorrow, if the weather held. It was not a promise. Not a declaration. Just a door, left slightly open. Luca watched her walk up the beach path, rucksack swinging, hair making its own decisions in the wind. He sat back on the bench outside the cafe and looked at the sea for a long time. He did not feel healed. He did not feel whole. He felt like someone who had walked a very long way through difficult terrain and arrived somewhere he didn't yet recognize but that had, for the first time in many months, a quality of possibility about it, a lightness he had almost forgotten existed. The roses at the old house were probably still blooming without him. He hoped they were. He thought, tomorrow, he would bring his notebook to the beach. For lessons, in Spanish, for those who have loved and lost.
El amor que no conoce la verdad nunca podrá conocer la plenitud.
Love that does not know truth can never know fullness.
La lealtad no es la ausencia del deseo, sino la elección de quedarse, honestamente, cada día.
Loyalty is not the absence of desire, but the choice to stay, honestly, every day.
Cuando todo se rompe, lo que sobrevive te muestra lo que siempre fue real.
When everything breaks, what survives shows you what was always real.
El corazón no pide permiso para sanar, solo necesita que lo dejes ir hacia la orilla.
The heart does not ask permission to heal, it only needs you to let it move toward the shore.